until you know, was this preventable or was this actually a fact where it just wasn't able to be done? Because there's obviously a track record of some issues. So I think you need to look, what's the viability of the model? And number two, once you know that, I think that's when you can come up with the punishment or whatever. But I think there's two ways I'd look at it. Number one, the rational thought, which is I think you need to look at it very smart. You need to look at beyond just next season and right now, because every sports league in the world right now is struggling. I ask you, if every team in the Super League did not get to furlough their staff and they didn't get any TV money, how many of them would have survived the last 6 months? That's something that needs to be said when you look at what the Wolfpack are going through, whether they agreed to this deal before or not. It's something that should be thought about when a decision's made. So I would say,
I think there would be no games this year if there was no pressure from Sky Television to want to have some sort of team sport to play to show on television in our country in August whilst the Premier League's off. to be completely honest, that's the up and down of this. The Premier League isn't going to be playing for 6 weeks now. They need some sort of team sport to get on on.
So with that in mind, I think you have to take the long-term view of what's the value of Toronto if it's run properly and you don't have the questions that are happening. And I think with that in mind, I think you say, here's some sanctions. But you also say, how do we attack? If you're going to keep Toronto in, whether you punish them or not, you still need to come up with how do you get around the central funding and the TV money issue, which is the issue here. If you just punish them now, you're not actually treating the problem. It's a punitive punishment. Put them in the championship, put them in League One. I think you're only going to hurt League One and championship teams. I think you put them in the championship, then now you have an odd number of teams. You got to work out that schedule. And now you have to say, if Toronto gets promoted, you've now screwed over championship teams, for lack of a better term, with no promotion this year, and probably Toronto coming right back up if they can build their team back pretty quickly. So now you've kind of hurt more teams, and you still haven't solved the money issue or any of the actual issues. So I think there's going to be a punishment. I wouldn't be surprised to see them in the championship. I was very enthused by what Ralph Rimmer said today about how the RFL would look at it, how they're looking beyond 2021, and they're looking at 2022. I think it was the most surprising quote I've heard from a rugby league official in the last 2-3 years.
That was some sense of medium to long-term plan.
To think about a plan, and that's the biggest frustration. Everyone's asking, what's the plan here? And I think there's a lot of people who have been asking that question. I think the Super League needs to take a long look at themselves and what they want. And I think it's pretty much shown that there's value for Toronto to be in there long-term with Sky. So I think the rational thing is you keep them in the Super League, you put some restrictions on them, you make sure that things are viable. Maybe there's some sort of probationary period, and then you avoid issues in the future. Realistically, I wouldn't be surprised to see them in the championship next year. And if they are, then I think they only have themselves to blame. And I hope long-term there's still a discussion and they don't kick it down the road and say, okay, we're going to put them in the championship next year, and then we're not even going to talk about TV or central funding until they come back up. And that would be just crazy to me.
The only other thing I would add is the one thing that people have been up in arms about is the good old visas. And I think that's going to be up to – it's such a beast of an issue. Here in Canada and the U.S., we're so used to having the big four sports. The guys come across the border, no issues. There's no real long-term concerns. And I think that's going to have to be worked out by RFL and Super League on how they're going to have a sustainable visa model, especially if you're going to have people from Australia or New Zealand playing in the UK and Canada. Obviously, that's going to be on the government side, and they're going to need support. But I think the people in the Canadian High Commission are more than willing to start that chat with Home Office. But it's going to be a bit of a negotiation. And once that's sorted, we can stop having the issues where guys are coming over with 13 players to play the Wolfpack.
Well, to be completely honest, it's going to be something we need to sort out with the French team once we leave the European Union as well.
Exactly, right? So.
We haven't made things easier for ourselves with that, as far as that goes. So I suppose that kind of gets us on to the last thing I wanted to discuss with you guys. And Scott, maybe this is where you can come into your own, because you're going to be a member of the fan base at Ottawa as well as Toronto next year. So how do you think this makes you guys feel on the position of intercontinental expansion of rugby league as a total idea? Do you think there's you think it can and will continue? And do you think the lessons that the Wolfpack have put, have created, like the visas, like some of the business operations that maybe would be expected to be dealt with differently over here than David Argyle's round things, for example? Do you think those lessons can be learned? Some of the mistakes can be corrected, and this will all work out, or do you think this could be a major body blow to actually a bigger expansion with the likes of Ottawa, New York, whoever else?
So that's a good question. So on the Ottawa side, I think it's all steam ahead still. The ownership team that's here is very well known in the Ottawa community. They're playing in a gorgeous stadium. So obviously we're going to have to deal with all the issues on the visas, deal with people getting angry that people aren't going to be able to do away games, and it's going to be a restart of that for especially the Ottawa fan base. For the UK listeners, sort of Ottawa obviously is about 5 hours away from Toronto. We're the bit of the little cousin of Toronto, where we have a big rivalry with Toronto, and Toronto doesn't think we exist.
It's kind of like Castleford and Leeds, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I'll say this much. We have an NHL franchise here called the Senators. When the Maple Leafs come to town, it's about 70% Maple Leafs fans and 30% Ottawa fans in the Ottawa Stadium. It's just how it is here. Who owns the team in Ottawa owns also awkwardly sort of Athletico Ottawa. It's a new interest now. They also own the Red Blast in 67, which is a junior hockey franchise, and they know how to run a product. Much like Toronto, they're going to, I think, be a bit of a interesting place to come. Especially for some of the fans. It'll be sort of like a Toronto-like atmosphere, but they do have to take their lessons from Toronto. They have to get all their ducks in a row. I think if they pay people on time, they'll be well on their way there. They've obviously already announced that their head coach, who's a good French National Rugby League, he'll fit well here because we are completely bilingual. Most of the city speaks French and English fluently. I think New York's going to be a bit of a mystery, and I think it still is a mystery. There's a lot of question marks around it, even from where their location is, because they're not playing in New York. And then a few other issues around that. But I think
that doesn't stop the Giants and the Jets being called New York.
This is true. But they're not playing at Red Bull Arena, which is in the middle of nowhere. But I think it's not going to stop it. But I think if the Wolfpack are severely punished or simply have their license taken away, which would be the worst case scenario, I don't see North American expansion happening. Now, what does that mean for rugby league in North America? I have no clue. We are starting to get kids playing rugby league here.
Well, that was obviously going to be my final thing to sort of ask about, I suppose. Are we seeing any sort of significant strides in grassroots developments in Canada, which I think would get probably some of the British fans who like to criticise Toronto maybe back on side if they start to realise we're starting a pathway here where we might actually get more people playing the game.
Yeah, sure, go for it. I will finish it up.
Yeah, so I can jump in there. I think the biggest David actually mentioned it a couple times this week. The biggest thing they've missed out on, and they've missed the mark on, is the community aspect. Is they came up with big aspirations, and I think a lot of that's to do with half their management team is in the UK and half of it's here. And I think they focus on it when they're here, but it's more of a 24/7 thing. I think there's another podcast I was listening to that mentioned, the Super League or the RFL should have 2 full-time development officers here in Canada. And I think that's a great place to start. Rugby league is not even a top 10 sport, I would say, in Canada in terms of people playing it. It's probably further down. You've got hockey, basketball, football, baseball, curling, figure skating. You could keep going, and you're probably going to find rugby league in that 10 to 15 spot, maybe.
Oh, well, no, you've got to list every single, snowboarding, skiing.
Exactly. Well, it's not even including
skiing, cross-country skiing.
Rugby union is played in high schools here, right, for example, and league is just nowhere. So I think they could do a lot more to grow the game, but I also don't think that's the Wolfpack's responsibility. And I think that's the hardest part is when you're one team in Canada, obviously with Ottawa coming in, you have 2 teams. I think the biggest question mark is why aren't the Super League and the RFL doing more out here? If they want these foreign teams in their league, why isn't that part of their strategy of setting benchmarks and milestones of this is when we want you to have a reserve team. There's no reason for Toronto to have a reserve team in Canada. Because it doesn't make sense to their business model, right? There's really no sense to it. So, I think you have to put some sort of milestones or expectations in place and then work with the teams here to make it happen. And I don't think anyone thought about that 4 years ago, other than fans who want to say, oh, they should have development, they should have Canadians on their team. Those Canadians that are on this team are playing other sports. Or you have Canadians like Reece Jacks, who plays for the national team, who wasn't Canadian enough for the RFL, so they ended up shipping him out for another overseas player because he counted against the quota, right? And so there's a lot of question marks around that. I think a lot more can be done to develop and support the sport here in Canada. That being said, Eric Perez is famous for saying it's the most Canadian sport that Canadians don't know about, and I fully stand behind that statement that he made 4 years ago about rugby league, and as long as Toronto can stay with it, and they don't have their license yanked out from them, I think in 5-10 years we should be able to laugh about this.
Well, yeah,
all of that being said,
are we seeing kids playing the game? Are we seeing more people aware of the game?
So
I think the awareness. You have 10,000 fans at a game here in Toronto on a summer's day when you have a ton of other things to be doing. And I think it's mostly kids and families at these games. And I think that awareness is spreading. You're seeing it in some high schools. There's a teacher named Nicholas Mew who is very active on Twitter, who I know is has stuff going on at his school, for example. Maybe it's just a few schools, but it's definitely expanding. And like I said, the one thing I think David and the team has dropped the ball on, literally, is getting balls in children's hands. And David said that in his interview this week. And I think more can be done. And I think if you have better structure, and a better setup long term, which probably goes towards all the things we talked about today, is you have a better structure in place for the team and the company behind the team, then you start seeing better effects off the field, like development of kids.
And to sort of add on to that, so the Wolfpack did partner with Rugby Ontario, which is a union group, and they did that because Rugby Ontario is funded by the Canada Rugby. They have a significant amount of funds, and they were at a lot of these events that learn rugby, and then they would oh, here's rugby league. But at the kids level, especially in Canada, you can just have them play with a rugby ball, and we're halfway there. You've seen Quinn, the guy who's switched codes. Obviously, he went back to union, and now he's back on league. I think there's a possibility. You see it, I'm from British Columbia originally, and now we actually have clubs playing league there, which you didn't have when I was growing up. I didn't even know league was a thing. In Ontario, I think you'll start seeing a few more league. The Canada Rugby League Association sort of had some problems in the last couple of years, which did not really help with the Wolfpack coming in, just in the fact that they weren't really set up to help. I think they're doing a lot of work in the back end to get that sorted, including have rugby league as an actual sport as defined by the Canadian government, which can help with a fair amount of funding.
Yeah.
I think we're getting there, but I think the fact that I think Henry nailed it on the head. The Toronto Wolfpack's job is not to grow rugby league in Canada, it's to be successful in rugby league, and that will bring people in. In Canada, we're really big on winners. We're really big on teams that are driving success, and the Wolfpack games are mainly kids, and kids are looking at a way to get involved in this team. And I think they're doing a good job of it. It's going to take some time. You're not going to have a rugby league trained player come and play for the Wolfpack in the next 5 to 10 years. I don't think it's going to happen. Mainly because, if you're good enough Canadian, you get shipped off, go play for Toronto, you're not on the quota. As soon as you try and go play for Rochdale, now you're a quota player. And they're not going to be able to have a chance to play because that team doesn't want to burn that spot. So whether that's a change to the RFL where you include Americans, Canadians, and I think Jamaica's included in our group as well, where they're not going to count against the overseas quota, I think that goes a long way, especially for guys who want to get a chance and want to break in, who are looking at these opportunities. And, you have limited professional opportunities in union. A lot of these guys could come over and play league easily. It's going to take some time on the rules. It's going to take some time on sort of the speed of the game. But there's guys, you can't tell me there's people who are playing in the Canadian development team that can't play at a League One level. So I think it will take some time, but It will happen, and I think there's 6 clubs